The more we understand about the outcome of this election, the more the Republican Party looks like the party of angry old white men. The Republican Party no longer reflects the changing demographics of the country. Is the grand old party on a road to obsolescence? Here to discuss the continuing fallout from Tuesday's election is the host of New York One's Inside City Hall, Errol Lewis, and the editor-in-chief of thecontributor.com, Tina Dupuy. Thank you both for your time tonight. Tina, let me start with you. You look at the sort of crosstabs in who voted for the Republican Party and, more importantly, who didn't, and then you look at the demographics of this country. They're like lemmings going over a cliff unless they fundamentally change themselves. Do they know that, and do they have the capacity to change?
That's a really good question.
That's why I asked it.
Fantastic. They've been talking about how the Republican Party needs to have a come to Jesus moment. I think they need a come to Jesus moment. Yes, they need to.
Good answer.
They need to figure out who they are going forward, because the country that they wanted back no longer exists.
Right.
And that's what you see at when people, Fox News especially, that kind of denial where they're like, no, this isn't really happening. Yes, it is. And what do they do going forward?
Errol, the denial of Fox News was not only denial about the numbers. I mean, they were looking at numbers coming in, pretending they weren't real. Put that idiocy. Karl Rove should go back to school and study arithmetic again. But put that aside. It's one thing for some leaders within the Republican Party to understand that they have a problem, and I think it's hard not to at least understand it. Do they have the capacity to change?
Not necessarily. I mean, because look at where all of the incentives are for any one individual. I mean, Karl Rove, yeah, maybe it was in his interest to be more attuned to what's happening in the country as far as demographic changes. On the other hand, some people gave him $300 million, and maybe next time they'll give him $500 million. And depending on what he or his backers want, there's not any particular moment where you have to say, hey, the elders of the party. Well, who are the elders? As we all know, there is no such body, right? These are all individuals who are in business for themselves. And, when you see something like $30 million thrown at Pennsylvania at the last minute, the first thing that went through my head is a bunch of consultants wanted to get one last 10% commission on a bunch of ad buys, even though it's not going to necessarily do anything for the candidate. This goes on, these little micro decisions, over and over and over again.
Well, two things. There are also some people who still do deny the intellectual argument we're making. They say if we'd only been more conservative, if we had been consistent on our conservatism, we would have won. I think they're dead wrong about that, but there is that sort of more theological argument within the Republican Party. So I don't know if there will be a consensus even they need to change. But take the two issues in my mind that, with respect to gender and the Latino bloc in particular, drive them apart. Gender issues. That is literally a theological issue for the Republican Party. They may not be able to push back against the hard right Christian coalition voices who say we're not going to change on issues of choice.
But there's also other issues. Like, I think that the most interesting thing that happened Tuesday night was that Montana, just as an example, this is a Romney stronghold. He won the state by 13 points. 55% of Montanans voted for Romney. Well, 75% of Montanans voted against Citizens United, saying that, in fact, corporations are not people, my friend. And so there were there are people who went to, Montanans who went to the polls and voted for Romney, but against what Romney basically stood for. And if they're going to do an autopsy, if they're going to figure out where they go forward, they need to look at that stuff too, because they don't know who their base is.
They also need to look at some of who was listening in. Like we characterize some of the anti-immigration stances that were taken by a lot of people, self-deportation and so forth, as anti-Latino. Yeah, well, it'll cost them with Latino voters. But there are others who are listening in. And if you look at where the Asian vote went, I talked to somebody who said 70%.
Numbers were shocking.
Yeah, and so they're gonna be in a state of total collapse if they don't.
That's why I say every one of the demographic groups that is increasing in size is one they are alienating. White men is the demographic that voted for the Republican Party. That's it. Nobody outside that box did they actually win. And so you talk of the Latino vote, which is growing by leaps and bounds. Every 4 years it goes up, not doubling, but very significant numbers. Can the Republican Party change its argument about immigration, or is it stuck and wedded to these outrageously right-wing voices who really have rabid views that are, in my view, heinous, but are driving their policies?
Well, nothing succeeds like success. Somewhere along the line, somebody, perhaps a Marco Rubio, we thought it would be a Marco Rubio. Before that, we thought it would be Mel Martinez. Before that, we thought it would be somebody else. But somebody's going to sort of make the case and demonstrate in the currency that they understand, which is winning elections, turning voters, getting constituencies that they're on the outs with right now. Somebody's going to have to demonstrate to them this is the way forward.
Look, I think you're right. Marco Rubio could be the most important person in the Republican Party right now, because if he can't bring the Republican Party back to a different position, and Jeb Bush and maybe George W. Bush. They are the voices that need to say to the Republican Party, on this issue of immigration, we've simply gotten it wrong. And, we'll have to wait and see if it matters. Tina, let me ask you a different question. All the money that was spent, we're talking billions of dollars. Did it change votes?
I don't think so. I mean, but I covered the Meg Whitman and Jerry Brown campaign, and Meg Whitman outspent Jerry Brown by 6 times, and she lost really bad by I think it's 6 points at least, and in California, it never matters if there are billionaires and people. Money doesn't matter in California elections, but in national elections, it always has. But the traditional wisdom has now been bucked by this particular election.
Right, and I think in the national spending patterns as well, you saw the Sheldon Adelson's. It's not clear to me that all of his money, he backed a sequence of losers. I think somebody said he was 0 for 9. All of that money simply bounced off of voters' consciousness. I mean, so what will those funders say next time?
Well, you'd have to ask Sheldon Adelson what he thought he was buying.
You may have his number, I don't. But that's
I did meet some of these characters at some of the conventions. I had a nice long talk with Foster Friess, wonderful, interesting man. But what they think they're getting, I think, is relevance, a place on the stage, somebody to listen to them, a place to put their money where their mouth is and where their values are. And they may value that more than winning any particular election.
Wouldn't somebody smart, even a consultant whom I rarely suggest should design business models, go to them and say, look, instead of giving it directly to a political campaign, go out and build a grassroots organization. In other words, do something that actually will mobilize voters.
Koch brothers have essentially tried to do that.
I guess the Koch brothers have tried
to do that.
Let's switch to the other side of the aisle. Thankfully, in my view, the president won. He has to set an agenda. Will climate change be on this agenda as we go forward?
He said that in his speech. He also mentioned voter reform, which I think is a big idea that needs to happen. I think that the wind is really at his back for doing immigration reform. I think that the Republican Party kind of is at a place right now where they should be.
And there's an implied deal, arrangement, or understanding between him and Mayor Bloomberg, who endorsed him at the last minute. Who knows whether it helped him or not, but it was around climate change. And for the president to have mentioned it in that very important speech, that's like one of the most important speeches other than State of the Union or acceptance speech at a convention. Your victory night speech, that's not something you can walk back. So he said climate change. We have to assume he means it.
It will be interesting to see if the Republican Party latches onto this in its effort to recreate itself and says, okay, immigration, climate change, we've got to project a different image. Who knows? We're reading tea leaves. Let's play a fun parlor game for a minute. Secretary of State, Susan Rice or John Kerry? Errol, who do you think?
If I had to guess, I'd say Kerry.
Kerry. Why? Because Susan Rice, because of the Benghazi kerfuffle?
No, because you need people who know their way around the Hill, because there's a domestic component to driving foreign policy that cannot be overlooked.
All right. Tina, who do you think?
His speech at the convention was an audition piece. So
yeah,
definitely.
Not every audition works.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, right.
It was an audition and he worked.
Yes, that was a Kerry that no one saw before. I was in the stadium and people were kind of sighed when he got up there, and then he just hit it out of the park.
That speech, people remember his giving.
He was the surprise sleeper speaker.
No question. All right. Treasury, the other major position that's opening. Tim Geithner leaving. Does he take somebody from Wall Street? Errol?
Undoubtedly.
You think he does?
Absolutely.
What's
the alternative?
To the huge distance. Oh, come on. There are people other than Warren who know.
Who's he gonna get?
Oh, come on. There are so many people who understand banking and finance better than those guys.
Yes, I wanted to be Ralph Nader.
You wanted to be Ralph Nader. All right. Robert Reich. We just had him on the show. I'd put Robert Reich in any cabinet position. Get him inside the White House. Host of New York One's Inside City Hall, Errol Lewis, editor-in-chief of thecontributor.com, Tina Dupuy. Thank you both for your time this evening. Our special election night edition of The Viewfinder is ahead. The future of the Supreme Court is next. More Viewpoint coming up.